Did we do it?
Yeah, yeah, we did. Hey, and like only 1 minute after the deadline. That's pretty good.
That's very good. Good job, Michael.
Thanks, man. Now, I don't think we're live on Rumble, but that could be a whole bunch of different things. So, um, who knows what that's related to?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, okay. So, let me just verify a couple of things. Well, there we go. All right, we are definitely getting live on Rumble.
All right.
Yep,
Very
it's
good.
just taking a second. All right, dude. So what's up, Sam?
Nothing much. Michael, how are you? How is life in your world?
Good. Our daughter's here, so that's super cool. It's also probably why I look a little tired. But yeah, she's here,
It's all
so
right.
that's been fun. She's 2 months old today, so
Oh, very
hmm
nice.
hmm
Well,
hmm
happy 2 month little birthday.
thanks,
That's
buddy.
nice. Is
Yeah.
she is she, I don't know, starting to like look and focus on things or see, or is she still sort of out of it?
No, she's focusing on stuff for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Very good.
yeah, so we're pumped.
I remember those times, man. Enjoy them. Enjoy them.
We will. Yeah, we are.
For us, it was a big blur of just because we always had to squat to like put her down, like because she liked that motion, that up and down motion.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like me and my wife, a ton of squats. That's all we did. Just like hold her on her shoulder and just like squat. We're just like, okay, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. So
Yeah.
that for me, that was pretty much my memory of like the first 4 months.
Well,
But
we've uh we've done a little bit of that, but I think she likes the monkey on the branch position, so we're putting her like, stomach down on our arm, head up,
oh
and let her see the world. That seems to calm her down. That and going on walks outside. So those
yeah,
two things seem to really help.
well, very good, awesome, man. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad for you.
Thanks, buddy. Um, so you just moved. How's the new part of the country?
Yes, so I moved to a little bit warmer weather area. I'm in Tennessee. Um, it's okay. It's actually I really love the like I guess the countryside. It's quite
Mm-hmm.
nice. The new job is treating me very, very well. So absolutely no complaints there.
Good.
Um, I guess it's just sort of getting acclimated, you know?
Yeah. Right. Um, but you took a new job. How's the wife like
Yeah.
the new part of the country?
She likes it better. She does not like cold weather, so
Okay.
it's definitely much better for her.
Mm,
Yeah, she's much happier here.
good.
Although until like because we're just sort of living in an apartment for now because we, don't really know where to settle yet, but
Mm-hmm.
she'll like it better, I think, when we get the house again.
Of course. Of course. All
Yeah.
right. All right. So we don't have the other two guys here because Franklin is, of course, on his obligatory globe trotting, and Kyle is in the middle of a commute somewhere, so he should be tuning in soon, but he's not going to join us tonight. For
How
the,
dare he?
I know, very much dropping the ball. No, he's in the middle of nowhere, Texas, driving, so I'll be surprised if he can stream the whole thing and listen, but let alone actually participate. Anyway, man. So, okay,
All right.
we've got some updates on a variety of things, I guess.
All
We've
right.
got updates on the podcast network. You just released a big episode 2 days ago.
Mm.
Kyle released one. We'll talk about that. And we've got a discount code we're running. We've got a new perk for our local supporters. And we'll talk current events. But I guess before we
Yeah.
do that, let's talk about the network as a whole. So we're running a discount code. It's over 50% off of the basic membership level, and it's over 25% off the upper membership level. It's the code is discount four, the number four, all one word at freedomcast.locals.com. Essentially, what it's going to do is it's going to get you $4 off a month for 6 months. Um, Try it out, see if you like it. If you don't, no worries. Appreciate any feedback on how we can do things better and help be better stewards of the money people are are bringing in our way. But we wanted to put that out there, so it's discount 4 at freedomcast.locals.com. Merch store is getting an overhaul soon. And let's see, is there anything else? Oh, there is one other thing. Podcast bingo. So let me go ahead and I'm going to open this file up, and it'll be available in the show notes again. But if anyone wants to take a quick look at it, we've redone our bingo card for this quarter. And so, rules of bingo: 5 consecutive connections in a row in a straight line. All you have to do is have listened to one episode in full from 5 podcasts. Let us know. Email us at bingo@freedomcast.us. And the first 3 people to do so will get free merch sent their way. So,
Can we at least get the middle square free? I mean, come on, Mike.
Yeah, that actually probably would be good to make it easier for folks. But as of right now, that's not the case. Next quarter, I will do that. Remind me. But the 4 podcasts on the network: Conventional Wisdom, that's Sam. For Miss Todd is me. Thought Pioneering is Kyle. And In Good Spirits, that's Joe and Melissa. They're the first affiliates of the network, on the network. They're the 4 corners. So try to maximize the number of ways that you can connect to one or more of the Freedom Cast podcasts. So, digital daubing of the bingo card, and it's...
Did we? Sorry for being so misinformed here. Did we invite Joe and Melissa to this live stream?
We reached out to them, but I had never heard back affirmatively one way or the other. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, because last live stream they were here, but I was not. So
right,
I didn't chance to kibitz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no worries. All right, so discount 4, freedomcast.locals.com.
Yes.
Free merch, digital bingo card, bingo@freedomcast.us. And I think that's about... Oh, we have a free newswire, freedomcast.substack.com. All these links will be in the description of the video.
Did I catch something where we were going to play poker?
Mm-hmm.
Is that...
Yeah. So that's the next thing is we're going to add a poker night for our local supporters to come play poker with the founders.
Yeah.
We're not sure if we're going to do that once a month or once a quarter. Probably hedge towards once a month, and have some collection of the founders and affiliate podcast hosts that you'll get to come play a night of poker with. There's other perks in the membership, like discounted merch, the ability to contribute to the newswire, the ability to participate in live streams, that kind of stuff.
So is that going to be like an online, I guess, online?
Yeah, it'll be an online poker thing. Mm-hmm. And we're going to try and find something that doesn't juice the cards. 3 of a kind should be a good hand, not something that is the basic hand that you're dealt, because online poker is trying to just smash that dopamine button.
Really skews the odds.
Yeah. So anyway, those are the updates at the network level. Definitely check out the newswire. It's free. We only send 1 email a week on that, and you can subscribe from all other Substack emails after you get your first email, so you won't get a flooded inbox. It's a very simple newswire. It's sourced from very diverse sources, and it's not that we guarantee everything in there is true, but we guarantee that all the stories in there are important and worth following and seeing through, to the extent that they're true, and then also to the extent that folks may believe that they're true, because they're going to inform politics or at least civics on a go-forward basis. So I think one of the biggest stories we had last week was the blow-up of NPR, essentially ideologically captured, has been tilting increasingly, quote-unquote, left progressive, which is not really a progressive stance. And in the time since, they proved the critic, who was a whistleblower essentially from them, a senior editor who'd been there for 2.5 decades, they proved him right by suspending him without pay, and then he just resigned. And since then, Cruz Rufo and some others have been on a war path to demonstrate that the NPR CEO wields truth towards her utilitarian ends. So all that said, check out the newswire, bingo card, discount merch, locals page for folks.
I mean, is it a shock? Is it a shock that NPR leans so left? Was it a shock for you? I mean, I kind of suspected for a while, and I was like, all right, well, that's not really it's not big news for me.
Yeah, breaking. No, I don't think it's too big of a shock. I think one of the things that is most surprising about it is that that people have kind of like a dissonance because there were programs on NPR that were very enjoyable. Like they were early in the podcast game, and some of their podcast stuff was pretty good. It was entertaining. It still had like a bias probably, or at least focused on things that were conservative media wouldn't focus on. Let's say, but that's could still be worthwhile. So people have like this kind of nostalgia for NPR. Maybe even liberals have nostalgia for NPR versus what it's turned into. And the other thing I would say is that the fact it gets some of its money from like federal subsidy or funding, let's say, I think that's also kind of something that's a jolt for people. It's like, wait, what's going on? The craziest part was the fact that this woman who is the CEO used to be in charge of the Wikimedia Foundation, which means that she was helping. People have said as of late that the editorial policies at Wikipedia have moved more towards suppressing right-wing narratives and elevating kind of left-wing truths, which
Right.
there's good evidence for. There's actually a great paper. It's like my favorite paper the Information Systems published, and it's a research note. And they studied the bias in Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica. What they found was overall Wikipedia is more biased, but that the number of revisions the more number of revisions an article undergoes, the less bias there is, and on a per word basis, there's less bias on Wikipedia than Britannica, which was kind of like good. It shows like a marketplace of ideas, wisdom of the crowds type effect. But that was using like congressional transcripts from like the 2000s or 2010s, something like that. I suspect now, if you go back and you look at the differences in the how things used to be versus how they are now, and pull the modern lexicon, because they mined congressional records to do the mapping left versus right, and updated it, the authoritative quote unquote nonsense that Wikipedia's opted for as of late, I bet that has disrupted all of the benefit that Wikipedia had over an Encyclopedia Britannica.
Mm. Yeah.
Sorry, I rambled, but yeah. No, I don't
No.
think it's that surprising.
Yeah, I mean it's like one oh no, another institution that has been like leaning left for quite some time and trying to disguise itself as neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it seems like that has been happening a lot, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, it is important news, and it is good, but I think it at least for me, it doesn't really shock. There's no shock factor there. You know what I mean?
I got you.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say to? Do you think it's gotten worse? Do you pay any attention?
Oh, dude, I'm so checked out as far as that stuff. And it all has to do with one of our topics tonight of Bitcoin halving. I just Bitcoin in general. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
I'm so checked out. And I think there's good reason for it. But I am not as politically tuned in as I used to be. That is for sure.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, and we can definitely get into that, which I think is, it's worthwhile. And I think we'll talk about the halving coming up. But yeah, some of this stuff it's so blurred to me, and I'm so numb to it
Mm-hmm.
because there's something more exciting and more interesting to capture my attention, and I think is way more important both to individual and humanity. So it's like, okay,
Okay.
this-
Fair enough. All right, then we should probably go ahead and dive into tonight's topics. We don't let me close out the meeting before doing another series of plugs, please. But yeah, let's start with the topics, and let's start with the Bitcoin halving. What does it have to do with anything?
Ohio, look at you, master of the English language. Um, yeah, okay, so this is the whole reason why we're actually live streaming tonight, just so everyone's clear. It is to discuss the Bitcoin halving, which is one of the great events in Bitcoin world, I should say. Uh, well, the halving refers to the uh the new supply of Bitcoin that gets issued to the network is cutting in half, or it was cut in half around 7 p.m. tonight. It was at 6 1/4, and now it's at 3 1/8 Bitcoin per block. So,
Wait,
but
what does Bitcoin per block mean for folks who don't know?
exactly, I was just about to get into that. Well, first of all, Bitcoin is a money, and it is by far the greatest money we have ever, you can use the word discovered or you can use the word invent. I've heard both, and you can make an argument for both. But it is by far the greatest money that mankind has ever had. Um, it's not only so like the traditional definition of money, it was like you had to have three properties, right? It was a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. I would put Bitcoin in all three of those categories. The one that people gripe at a lot is the store of value, because they argue, oh, it's super volatile. Well, it is only 15 years old and gold is 5,000 years old, so you know, it is what it is, and it does have some volatility, but you should zoom out and you'll see that it absolutely has a store of value. Anyways, my point being that Bitcoin is the greatest money. Not only does it cover those three qualities of money, but it adds on, it introduces a couple new qualities of money that we as mankind really didn't know we wanted. One of them is sort of a decentralization, a removal from the state. Money has always been co-opted, or at least at some point controlled by the state, and centralized. Bitcoin is the first to be completely decentralized, thus making it incredibly difficult, almost impossible to destroy, and impossible to stop. You can't censor it. So many wonderful properties emerge out of that quality alone, and that's why I say, I mean, it's money that's so good we didn't even know how good this money is. So anyway, Bitcoin is money. The uh there's how can I break this down? This I cover a lot of it actually in my first episode, and I talk about like
You should
just
plug your
what.
three episodes. Yeah, yeah.
Sure. I did three total episodes on Bitcoin. The first episode was just like very high level, what is Bitcoin? Um, Second episode was kind of focused on what Bitcoin is not, because people tend to have a they tend to have a first impression on Bitcoin, and it tends to come from kind of sour sources. So it busted a lot of the myths involved with it and surrounding Bitcoin. And then my last episode, which I'm sorry that it took so long to come out, but as we covered in the beginning, I had moved and there's some, life events that took place. So it was just a while. But my third episode, give it a listen. It dropped earlier this week, covers the comparison of the dollar to Bitcoin. And once you understand what Bitcoin is, and you understand like, wow, it's such an amazing money and it's got all these wonderful properties. Well, what the heck do we have? And you sort of Bitcoin is like that introspective mirror that you hold up, and you get to see kind of the water that you've been swimming in your entire life. You pull a fish out of. You really can't explain water to a fish until you pulled him out of it to say like, this is what you've been swimming in. Um, and we have been swimming and inundated in the dollar fiat our entire lives. And I make that comparison, and I describe kind of what how the dollar operates versus Bitcoin. So, going back to the halving, there's a lot to talk about. Going back to the halving and kind of figuring out what exactly that is. The Bitcoin network runs it. There's within the Bitcoin network, there's actors, you could say, called miners. And a miner is nothing more than a dedicated piece of hardware, about the size of kind of a toaster or a kind of a large kitchen appliance. And all it does, its sole function, is to essentially it's to guess a number. That's all it's doing. And the reason why well, how should I say this? It's trying to guess a particular number, and once it has achieved that, it's very easy for the rest of the network, the rest of the nodes, to verify that it has guessed the right number. But it's running a ton, trillions of guesses per second, just trying to find this number, which requires a ton of energy. And we'll talk about that energy input because it's incredibly valuable. But it's trying to guess a number, and once it guesses that, it gets it correct, it then is allowed to cement a large amount of transactions into a block and kind of insert it into the blockchain and say, okay, bam, stamp it, double stamp it. here are the transactions that just went through. And the proof is all that energy I just had to expend to guess that number. Um, and the reward for all of that, all of my efforts of doing all that guessing is the what's called the block subsidy, which is the new issuance of Bitcoin.
It's
So a
like when the
miner,
Fed mints a new dollar.
yes, yeah, it's the new creation of Bitcoin. Um, so yeah, so it the miner is chugging along. It's guessing trillions of guesses per second to find this particular number. Once it does, it's expended a ton of energy. It needs a reward. The reward is new money. And earlier in the day, and for the last 4 years, that amount has been 6.25 Bitcoin per block. So once it's found that magic number, it gets rewarded with 6.25 Bitcoin. Well, today at 7 p.m., there was the event called the halving, which is where it gets cut in half. The reward for finding um, that number gets cut down to 3 1/8. Excuse me. So, for big picture, if all that was a little too confusing, um, what it's doing is it's constricting supply. The halving is just constricting supply. It's not erasing any of the current coins that are out there. We're not cutting the number of Bitcoins that are out in the world today in half or doing anything like that. All it's doing is it's cutting in half the trickle of Bitcoin that's coming into the market. The inflow. It's cutting that in half, thus making it a bit more scarce. And by simple supply and demand, if your supply goes down or at least gets kind of constricted, then and demand remains equal, then price has to adjust and price is going to go up. And it's one of the beautiful things that I covered in my first one, where Bitcoin is designed by its very nature, by this halving, to increase in value over time. And I think it's one of the more brilliant things that Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudo anonymous creator of Bitcoin, uh, included into the system, where he made it so that mathematically your Bitcoin gets more valuable over time because you have to price in time. That's what we want money to do. If I work a day today, and I earn so much money for my efforts. And if I don't spend it on anything right now, I'd love to carry it into the future to spend it next week, next month, next year. Um, Now, the reason why you wouldn't just want that money to stay the same for next year is because we price time. So as a real easy example, Mike, would you prefer I give you $10 today or $10 in a year?
Of course, today.
What about $10 or $11 in a year?
Sure, $10 today.
Right. There is going to be a point where you're going to say, okay, I'll take the however much in a year. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's $20, maybe it's $50. I don't know what it is.
Right.
That's you pricing time. That's you saying this is how much time is worth in my brain relative to whatever base unit we're using. We're using dollars in this example. Yeah, so we want our currency to increase in value over time. And the Bitcoin halving is mathematically ensuring that that is the case. It's saying this, all being equal, there's a very unlikely caveat here where if demand drops off a cliff, then price will adjust. But all being equal, demand staying the same, price will go up. The But I don't actually like using that word price there. It'd be better if I said your purchasing power will go up.
Because the
Because a lot of
marginal supply of Bitcoin is decreasing.
yes, and the things that you can use your money to buy, uh, just it captures a larger chunk of the economy. It I don't like using price because it gets sticky. A lot of people want to say Bitcoin's value is priced in dollars. Well, that's really useful for quick communication because everybody, you understand that, hey, this drink was a certain amount of dollars and whatnot. But a dollar is just measuring economic output. Um, this Topo Chico cost, let's say it's $5. So that is some amount. Let's say it's one millionth of our economic output created this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Doesn't matter what we're using, dollars or pesos or Bitcoin. It's still the economic output is gonna, in a free market, is gonna price this thing at one millionth of the total economic output, whatever it may be. Say it's $5 or say it's some amount of Bitcoin. But since Bitcoin cannot be inflated away, there's a hard cap of 21 million, which is also a wonderful property that you would want in your money, a completely hard cap. Since it cannot be inflated away, the amount of things that my Bitcoin can purchase in our economy continuously grows. So, whereas this thing costs one millionth of our economic output, over time, for my Bitcoin, it'll be less and less and less. It won't be one millionth, it'll be one trillionth, over time, and thus costing me less of my Bitcoin that I have in my pocket.
There's yeah, but there's an issue with circulation, right? Like this presupposes that you have sufficient adoption. No.
Sure, like demand, right? So let's replace the word adoption with demand. Right.
Okay.
Like I caveated a lot of the things that I said just now with all of things being equal and demand remaining constant. Now, you just made the argument of like, well, what happens if demand falls? Sure, could. Like I said, I think it's incredibly unlikely, I'm sorry, that demand is about to fall off a cliff with Bitcoin because, like I said, it is the greatest money mankind has ever seen, and we desperately want a good money. But there's a really good argument to say that no, we are on an S-curve adoption, an S-curve demand, where in the beginning, the first few years of Bitcoin, and I still consider us in the first few years of Bitcoin, like how many people do you know use Bitcoin? Me? Maybe one other. Soon it'll be 5, 10, soon it'll be 100. Pretty soon it's going to be everyone you know and only a few people that you don't know. So it will be adopted, in my view, in my estimation, excuse me, similar to how the internet was adopted. Okay, the internet was so useful for mankind that, well, no one knew it in the beginning. People were on, you remember those people on television, and they're like, "What is the internet? What is that like A with the circle around it?"
Yeah.
No one knew, right? Nobody understood what the internet was, and no one could have predicted where the internet was going. But the internet was so useful for mankind because it allowed information to be unleashed, the free flow of information. Whereas before it was gatekept by, media outlets or cable news stations or the radio or something. Now information could be accessed incredibly cheaply and all over the world, pretty much unfettered. Right. So just complete access to information. And that was so useful because we can build so many things on top of the internet. And even if the internet had some problems, which it does, right? There's a security issue with the internet. Like my information could leak. Mm-hmm. Certain things could happen. But because it's so useful, people are the brightest minds are dedicated to helping this thing out. Thus, when a problem arises, it gets immediately addressed. So like as security, is an issue with the internet, people will invent like VPNs or other ways of like helping you stay safe on the internet. That stuff just gets layered on and it's built on top of this internet. So whatever problem you might see on the internet, it's not a death knell for the internet. It's just one more thing for an entrepreneur to make money off of to solve, because the benefits he receives and thus mankind receives are so much more greater than if you were to just shut down the internet. So the incentive, I should just sum this up by saying the incentive to adopt the internet was so strong, it overcame obstacles. It innovated to overcome obstacles. This is the exact same thing that we are seeing with Bitcoin. So we are on an S-curve adoption. The benefits that mankind will see by having sound, immutable money that cannot be tampered with, that cannot be stopped, it can't be censored, no government can shut it down, gets more valuable over time, incredibly valuable over time. I can store it in my head and walk across any checkpoint the world has ever seen, and they can pat me down, and then I can get to the other side, and all I need is an internet connection, and bada bing, bada boom, there's my money. Adopting that is so valuable for all of mankind that any issues that you might see, any threats that might come up to try and swat it down are going to be met with the whole economic production of the world saying, F you, I want money. I want to store my wealth, my value, which everybody really wants. So the demand for this is only going to go up, is the answer to that problem, that what you just posed. So we are in an S curve adoption rate, and I think we're probably pretty early. I would say we're still very early. If you think you're late to Bitcoin, you're not. My proof for that is, who do you know that's in Bitcoin? Maybe one person, two. We're still very early, so don't be scared that the price in US dollars is, I didn't check it recently. It's like upwards of $60,000. You don't have to buy a full Bitcoin. Buy a little bit of it. You might as well do it to just in case this lunatic on FreedomCast Livestream is right. Just in case this thing explodes and it is the next internet style invention, and it does hold your wealth and get greater over time. Just in case it does do that, you might as well put like what, 1%, put $10, put $50 into Bitcoin.
Not financial advice.
Just in case I'm wrong, you lose $50, but in case I'm right, there's no limit. And in fact, the equation, Mike, you want me to give you an equation of what your wealth is in fiat versus Bitcoin?
Go for it.
All right. In terms of fiat, which I guess I should maybe describe that. Fiat is just government money, like the US dollar or everything else everything besides gold that you can think of really is fiat. In terms of fiat, it is, so think of the total as the numerator is the total economic output that you could possibly have, right? So in your lifetime, you work, 40, 60, 80 hours a week for however many weeks, and you add all that up. That's your total amount of economic output divided by the total amount of monetary units that in that system, which in a fiat system can be infinity because there is no limit to how much they can print. None.
You're explaining
Zero.
Inflation.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So your money and your total economic worth is going to go to zero in a fiat system over time. It just will. Over time. If you decided to put your money in a bank account and give it to your great-great-great-grandchildren, they'd never receive it. It just wouldn't happen.
Isn't this like was it Keynes who said like in the long run we're all dead anyway or something like that? It's like, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, well, also Jordan Peterson said any idiot can pick a time frame to which nothing's relevant or important. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean the Fed, for example. Here's a good way to explain it, I think.
Yeah.
The Fed.
Wait, hold on. Let me real quick finish my thought, because it was that was under fiat, yep. Right? Under Bitcoin, it's however much your economic output is divided by 21 million, and then that's it. Like that's it.
Asymptotically to 21 million. Yeah, right.
Yeah, asymptotically. So there's a mathematical reason why you would want to store your money into Bitcoin. Go ahead.
So the few questions from the chats, but first of all, people should go check out for a lot of the criticism and questions people have about Bitcoin and contingencies, that kind of stuff. Check out Sam's second episode on Bitcoin. It was released a few months ago in his 3-part series. That's kind of where he takes on some of the challenges. And to his credit, he reached out to me because he knows I'm both a Bitcoin advocate and also skeptical about its...
I wouldn't use advocate. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think I was using Bitcoin
I'm
before
giving
you.
you a hard time.
Okay.
Yes.
Somewhere Franklin is in the middle of Tunisia, like pulling his hair out. But no, so one question from the chat is Bitcoin vulnerable to being inaccessible? So maybe you could talk about like Bitcoin as a system, as a kind of ledger system with electronically denominated units. Is that vulnerable to being inaccessible? Kind of big picture, and then also, and maybe you can get into like custody. Um, how does custody interface with the accessibility of Bitcoin at a personal level? So like at a system level and then at a personal level, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Sure. Um, all right. So I know who asked that question, and I because there's like several layers to this, and I don't want to maybe speak from too deep in the rabbit hole. Um, so to kind of broadly answer that question, it was, is it vulnerable to being inaccessible?
Mm-hmm.
If going back to what I said earlier, some of the best and brightest minds are innovating on top of Bitcoin. And one of the things that has come out of Bitcoin, it existed before Bitcoin, but one of the things that is paramount and I think very, very important with Bitcoin is you have a group of people that come together that make something and they make their code open source. It's just a layer of like, hey, we're not hiding anything. Here's, you can take all this code and do the exact same thing I'm doing, but here's the code. Um, so it's free. It'd be free open source software. And in that case, it kind of removes a barrier to entry so that even though most people are not coders, the theoretically the doorway into Bitcoin is so wide open and it is for everybody, that all you really need is an internet. Actually, you don't even need an internet connection. The craziest thing is there's some company developed a system to send and receive Bitcoin via the phone lines in Africa. So they're giving Bitcoin to people who don't even have internet connections, which is wild. But just I guess in general, all you need is a internet connection, and these free and open source wallets and programs are out there for you to find them on the internet, download them, and then you can have access to Bitcoin. Um, um, there's different ways to gain access. Like once you have a wallet or you have some way of storing your Bitcoin, there's different ways to acquire Bitcoin. One way is to mine it. You could buy the mining setup and do that. That's probably off the table for most just individuals listening. Um, Another way would be to buy it off of an exchange, which is probably 99.9% of the people that would be listening to this. That's probably their number one option. Um, is you go to a website. It's just a marketplace where people are exchanging Bitcoin for US dollars, and you've got a bunch of US dollars lying around. You go ahead and buy it. And typically, the only barrier to entry there is depends on which jurisdiction you're in. But most of the time, it's like you have to link a bank account so that they know what bank account you have. Your name is attached to that. So you would need, again, depending on your jurisdiction, you would need probably like identification and your bank account information. If you're not willing to do that, there is like Bitcoin ATMs that just like are littered around the country. You can literally walk up to an ATM and I think you put in like $10 or whatever, and then it spits you out a little receipt for some Bitcoin that's stored on a particular wallet, and it gave you kind of like a paper wallet type thing. Or you can even, I think you can input your destination wallet, and it can actually send you Bitcoin to that wallet. I think, I'm not sure there, but there's that option. And then of course there's the native way of if you want to be big brain about this, is just exchange your work and energy for Bitcoin. Do something for which somebody was willing to pay you Bitcoin for. Today, I paid somebody in Bitcoin. I don't do it every day because it's not that easy currently because we're still early in the adoption curve to find people that are willing to do something for you for Bitcoin. But I've done it as recently as today. That would be another way of doing that to get you know, no information needed, and do some labor and receive some Bitcoin. So the barrier to entry for Bitcoin is meant to be so incredibly low because it is a money for the people, by the people, of the people. It's meant to be for everybody. Doesn't matter what language you speak, doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you have an internet connection, or you even don't have to, you can have access to Bitcoin. And that was by design, which is it's so incredible to think like how Satoshi came up with all this and how it was implemented. Because if you think about it, Mike, uh, the a money that is meant to be for everyone it kind of has to start among the masses, and then it's kind of a from the bottom up adoption. So it starts broadly amongst people, and then you go into like maybe businesses, then corporations, and then governments at the very top. Um, Fiat was the other way around. So fiat money gets adopted by governments first, and then that trickles down to the people. Bitcoin is a money for everybody that starts at the bottom and works its way up. And you're seeing that because in the early days, it's only people that have, it's only like individuals, like people like me and you, who own Bitcoin. And pretty soon, like some businesses got interested in, they're like, hey, why don't I put this stuff on my balance sheet? And there's a particular company who's making history. The name is MicroStrategy. They've become, I think, they've like skyrocketed to being like, I don't know, somewhere in the Forbes 500, I think. Don't quote me on that, but they have become incredibly wealthy just by putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And then nation states, the country of El Salvador, decided to make Bitcoin legal tender. So you can see kind of the upward movement of Bitcoin and how it is starting from the bottom. It's a freedom money for everybody, meant to be separated from state. So the barrier to entry is very, very low. I think that answered the question. Inaccessible. Yeah. Now I could go much deeper into that as far as the technicality of your question, because there will come a time, and I don't want to hinge on this too much, because remember, any problem that might arise in the Bitcoin system, similar to the internet, will be met with the full force and innovation of the world's smartest people. So I'm not really worried about this.
The ones
But
who are not working for state actors.
sure, yeah, yeah. But typically, I mean, are the smart ones work? Do you think the bulk of them are working for state actors?
It's not a matter of, I think there's first mover advantage for state actors in that they have access to kind of bleeding edge tech a lot of the time. And that's not even like conspiratorial, just in terms of like the way contracts are structured and stuff with tech. That's one. Two, I think as a general rule, the average, let's say, data scientist or software engineer in tech is probably more competent than the average bureaucrat in federal government. No, like I don't doubt that. But the question is, what are the selection criteria? What's the headhunting like for the actual top talent? And are those people getting pushed into Pentagon type roles? And that seems likely.
Well, another thing you have to think about is I'm sure that the US government and most governments at this point in time have had backroom meetings where they're like, hey, what the hell is this? And the only reason they're doing that is because they woke up 15 years later and Bitcoin is kicking the shit out of every single currency that's ever existed and is not stopping. And they're thinking, well, what the heck is going on? And so they're being very reactionary, whereas the people who understand Bitcoin, first of all, to understand Bitcoin is to, in a large part, give a gigantic middle finger to the government. So the ones that truly understand it and truly are the pioneers and innovators of Bitcoin. I mean, these were the OG cypherpunks The people that like didn't want, like never had their privacy leaked. Satoshi. Nobody knows who this guy is. He's the biggest middle finger to any government that's ever existed. No one knows who he is, and he created Bitcoin. So the people who are the most passionate and understand Bitcoin the absolute most, no contract, no amount of US fiat dollars is going to entice them. And that's another like beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that you can't, when the government comes to me and they've just printed $17 trillion and they say, here's $17 trillion, give me all of your Bitcoin. I'm going to say, you mean that money that you just disrespected and devalued all over the place? You want to hand me that while I give you this precious money that's backed by energy and backed by the most secure network in all of existence that cannot be replicated or duplicated or censored? I'm going to tell you to go F yourself. I'm going to say, no, 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 no. There's no amount of printing you can do to take my money. In fact, I got an idea. How about you fix our roads? How about you put up a border? How about you do things? And then I will willingly give you some money. You don't get to take it from me. When enough people wake up and realize that Bitcoin is that amount of FU, yeah, it's a revolution. And so, no, there is no co-opting this thing by governments. They will try, but there's none. But let me go back really quickly to just the small thread that I wanted to say as far as technically there will come a time in the future where owning Bitcoin in the sense of I own Bitcoin that is in the blockchain, cemented in the blockchain, will be very, very, very expensive because of mining fees. This has been predicted by a few people. It may not happen. Mining fees somehow may stay relatively low. Sorry, not mining fees. Well, it is a miner fee, but it's a transaction fee. So you want to like say you want to buy $50 of Bitcoin, but the fee to get that done is like $70. And it's like you can't do it. So there will come a time when that could be the case. However, there's other solutions on top that will mitigate this. And it's too much for me now to like go into, but you could think of layer 2 solutions. You could just Google like Bitcoin layer 2 solutions. And they will that there's plenty of that, just like there's plenty of layer 2 and layer 3 and layer 4 solutions on top of the internet to fix a lot of the things that might have gone wrong.
Yeah, but as you go through the different layers and protocols of software and hardware, there's more opportunity for exploits too.
Yeah, I mean, I went on the internet. You're not wrong. You
The
have to
immutable
understand
ledger thing, I get, like the distributed immutable aspect, it
yeah,
provides a lot of, and the asymptotic, marginal production of Bitcoin.
yeah,
All that's like, it's like kind of like digital physics. Like I get that. I get why
yeah,
those are governing laws. But, well, let's put it this way. I'm not bearish on Bitcoin at all. I'm just not as bullish as Sam.
yeah, yeah.
I think,
Few are.
yeah. It's like you and Michael Saylor.
That's high praise, my friend.
Yeah. Okay.
No, there's people way more bullish than me. I would encourage everybody to do your own research. I mean, Bitcoin is absolutely fascinating. As I mentioned in the outset of this whole thing, it has completely captured my attention. And I guess maybe I'll close with why it has captured my attention from all this other stuff, apart from all this amazing stuff that I've said. Specifically, the reason why I have sort of tuned out the political arena is because the political fight is largely there's probably a lot of things that many people can say on this, but it's largely trying to limit or assign roles or limit the role of the government or some central authority. Mike, I sent this to you in a text, but I wanna reiterate this because when I heard this, I was like, holy crud, this thing it's so important for humanity. In order for corruption to take hold. A couple key things have to be available for the entity, the government, the corporation, something. It needs to be able. Probably there's a lot of things, but I'm just going to list three. It needs to be able to seize something of yours without much repercussion. It needs to be able to censor something that you have to say, or do something like that, and it needs to control a particular type of market. I'm thinking like, yeah, you're controlling like a capital market, right? So a government, if the government has the ability to seize, either throw you in jail or just take your money or repo your house for no particular reason, and there's really no repercussions for that, and there's really, there's nothing stopping them to do that. The tendency for them to be corrupt is great. If the government has the ability to censor what you say, then the tendency for them to be corrupt is great. Same thing with the market. So again, the Constitution tried to mitigate two of those three things by saying, well, you can't censor what we have to say because we're going to write it as the First Amendment, so you can't censor our speech. And we don't want you to come take our stuff, so we're going to arm our population. They didn't have really a good, at least the original documents of the Constitution didn't have a good maybe thwart for controlling markets. But if let's say the government never censored you and never seized any of your property, but still were allowed to control, like dictate prices on everything, yeah, then they're going to tend towards corruption. The Bitcoin represents something that at its core cannot be seized, cannot be censored, and is the absolute mirror of a free market. It is the free market. So all this bickering of politics, of like who's going to be in charge and what's happening on a political level, to me is a smaller problem than just fighting corruption. Because that'd be great if corruption was just disappeared. It'd be amazing. And under a Bitcoin standard, that becomes too expensive to be corrupt. You simply can't. Every efforts to be corrupt would turn you would go bankrupt, and thus there's no. I can't print money. I can't steal it. I can't manipulate a market. Crap, I have no economic output, and I have no money. So
Is that true though? Because like the analogy people always draw is gold, right? As like perhaps 3/4 baked as it is. Like there's corruption even when we had a gold standard or when we traded in physical metals. Like
yeah, gold had a big issue because it's centralizing by nature. It has to be. Because it's so difficult to move through space. Gold has a great ability to move gold through time because it stores its value through time. It's great. It's very difficult to move it through space. You try and move 300 tons of gold from here to London, and you're going to lose a giant chunk of it in just logistics, security, all this other stuff. It's very difficult. So, as people realize, well, I can't really move this thing, so it's best if it's just in one spot. And then if I don't move it, then I keep a lot of its value, so it just stays in one spot. Well, then like it starts to centralize in bigger and bigger spots, namely like what is the place in Fort Knox, or just in central banks, in the vaults of central banks. And it's like, okay, it's here. And then what happens? It's like, you know what? We only have this amount of gold in our reserves, but we'd like to get done some stuff, maybe nefarious things on the side that we can't really get done. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to just issue paper notes to say like, it's not really a 1-to-1, it's like a 2-to-1 paper notes to gold. And then at some point, we're just going to go off the gold standard. So there is a centralizing force in gold. There is corruption. But I do want to say you're not wrong in the fact that corruption will just disappear under a Bitcoin standard. Of course, you're going to have bad faith actors and people are going to attempt it. Excuse me. And bad things are still going to happen. But by its very nature, a a political party or a central government or a big corporation, for them to be corrupt, they'd have to do a lot of those things. They'd have to censor you, like, misinformation, free speech. They'd have to tell you kind of what they had to control the narrative of like what is and what is not true. They could take your money, they could devalue it or whatever. They could control markets. With Bitcoin, this cannot happen. So the fear of a company getting so large to be able to just do whatever, it's no longer a fear. It just cannot be done. The If you want to extrapolate this out and figure out, okay, what would governments look like under a Bitcoin standard? It's one of the coolest thought experiments to do, because what you'll come to realize is that governments would be much more segregated, not segregated, sorry, would be much smaller and localized. And they would be, the size of a local government would be exactly proportional to how much it takes care of its constituents, its citizens, because its citizens are going to voluntarily reward their local governments with Bitcoin. And then they're going to be like, okay, great. I took care of the area, the citizens. I can handle money pretty well, and I'm doing a good job, and I get voluntary money from its citizens. That's how governments will operate. I don't have to pay a big government that's doing shit for me. I just don't have to pay them. So they cannot be big and bloated. They can only be productive. Under a Bitcoin standard, productivity skyrockets because you have to. That's it. I mean, so it's a beautiful thing. I would encourage everybody to do your own research. Think about Bitcoin. Think about getting more of it. We're still early, but it never hurts to get some in case I'm right, in case this thing catches on. Put like
If you're
$50
willing to speculate and or you're convinced by Sam's arguments.
It's not it's not a stock. I would say that. I said at the very beginning of this, Bitcoin is a money. And a lot of times people have concerns about Bitcoin and they say, well, like, what about XYZ? And a lot of those concerns will fade if you simply replace the word Bitcoin with money. So one of them is there's no intrinsic value to Bitcoin. Okay. Is there intrinsic value to money? Does mankind need money? So how about does mankind need communication? Does mankind need transportation? Does mankind need a market? These are all so incredibly valuable and necessary for mankind that, of course, we need it. We need money. Bitcoin is just the best money ever existed. So this whole nonsense of Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. No, Bitcoin is a money, and you can choose yourself to not value money. Go right ahead. Have fun staying poor. I don't know what to tell you. Money is incredibly valuable for mankind.
Well, with that out of the way and not investment advice, let's move on to the next topic. We're right at 59 minutes on.
It's life advice, Michael. I have the Conventional Wisdom podcast, and it's very wise to store your time and energy in sound money.
It is wise to try and minimize your exposure to having your assets inflated away.
How about maximize?
I think optimization problems are easier to minimize risk than maximize upside.
Well, yeah, do your own research.
Yeah,
I should say.
All right. Next topic. Something way more lighthearted. Israel, Iran,
Dude,
Palestine.
that is live stream we've ever had. It gave so much hope to all of our listeners. So much hope and optimism for our future. Well, I mean, I didn't sit here and just say like, oh, the dollar is doomed and our system's about to come crumbling down. I said, look to the bright orange future.
Well, I do think on our Minds page, let me see if I can get this quote exactly right.
Oh, is it something that I posted?
Let's see. The uplifting message, not dunking on. The dollar is garbage. It's stealing value from you and forcing you into slavery. Opt
Oh,
out of that
yeah.
system with Bitcoin.
Yeah, because that was promoting my third episode.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just funny.
because yes, because my third episode, maybe I should, maybe, I mean, why not? Mike, look, this is, we're on a train that can't be stopped here. I'll just briefly summarize it, right? So to understand the dollar and how the dollar operates, because it's fiat, it's not tethered to anything. I mean, it's not backed by anything. It's just really the only thing it's backed by is a promise that if I create $10 billion today, $10 trillion, it's going to go into the right places of the economy, and it's going to spur everything along, and it will create a better tomorrow that is so rich and prosperous that I can justify its creation today. You are you are creating dollars today in the hopes that tomorrow you will pay them back with a more productive tomorrow. Another way of saying that is you are pulling money from the future to spend on things today. Another way of saying that is you are robbing your future in order to create money today, all in the hopes that you're going to create a amazing future with more printed monetary units. But really, what you're doing is you're creating a payment tomorrow. So tomorrow you're going to wake up with a payment because you promised to pay something back. So you're creating debt as soon as you do it. So the debt and the dollar is goes hand in hand. And you're also, because you're just spawning monetary units into today willy-nilly, you're creating inflation. You're losing the value of your dollar. So not only is you're kind of F tomorrow because you wake up and you've got a payment because you have to pay something back because it was promised you would, um, but the value, the how far your dollar can go constantly goes down. Um, I talk about that a lot, probably too much in my third episode. I probably got a little long winded, but that's okay.
I know
This live stream
people are gonna find that hard to
is
believe.
this live stream can serve as a proxy. You can just listen to that little like 2 minute discussion, or I don't know, it was 5 minutes or so. That's the dollar in a nutshell. It's you're taking money from tomorrow to pay for things today. In good how should I say, in good it's coming from a good place. Everybody wants a more productive tomorrow, and everybody wants a booming economy. So it's coming from a good place, but so often, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
All right, now we are going to pivot. And let's try to talk about these things in ways that touch on your newest fascination, which has been the last 18 months or so, 24 months. But also,
Everything revolves around Bitcoin.
I understand,
So
yeah.
I can link any topic.
All right. So Israel, Iran, Palestine. Obviously, since the last live stream kicked off, we talked about October 7th, reactions to October 7th, the tension between free expression, particularly on the side that is more inclined, though they don't always, but the side that is more inclined to be sympathetic towards Hamas's actions, as horrific as they were, and where are the boundaries between free speech that we would defend as a free speech network, who would we try and have on, what are our assessments on the conflict specific to October 7th and the reaction, as well as the maybe situated within the broader context. And I think we had varying degrees of familiarity of that broader historical context spread across us, which is fair enough. It's probably pretty indicative of the U.S. population as a whole. So since then, Israel has launched a very brutal but militarily, they've hit a lot of milestones, though perhaps not many achievements, campaign, and had immense collateral damage, and they've lost a lot of public support. People have kind of entrenched themselves more firmly on one side and another. But there's some dynamics that have emerged that are interesting. So 3 things really quickly. One is that the pejorative of anti-Semitism has suffered from, I think, kind of inarguably now, though there are certainly anti-Semites in the way we would think about them as being truly prejudicial and kind of abhorrent. That pejorative has been thrown around so much as to become diluted in its meaning as a rhetorical defense for not having to engage with other people's good faith, but even perhaps misguided, but good faith and at least reasonably historically literate arguments. So that's something that has typically been characteristic of, and apologies to our listeners, but it's been characteristic of the left over the last couple decades. Hey, I'm going to take this term that means something and use it so flippantly so that its value is diluted. There's your link to crypto and fiat and that kind of stuff. But that's the first thing. Is
I'm sorry, what was the link?
the dilution, the semantic dilution of the semantic payload of terms like
Oh, I
racist,
see.
sexist.
I
Yeah,
see. Their use of the language is the fiat
mm-hmm.
equivalent.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The
Got
supply of those people who deserve those labels is outstripped by the demand for such people who actually would.
Of
Yeah,
course, of course, of
right.
course.
But so there's that. So this is inflation of this. The second thing is that is a phenomenon that is actually coming from disproportionately the right side of the aisle now, and that there have been demonstrations and disruptions around the country. So, for just a quick example, like a student, I think at a university out in California, I think maybe Berkeley, but I could be wrong on that one. She followed some like huge lib law professor to his like private residence and like had some sort of interpersonal protest type things. Like that's clearly not what we're talking about when we mean free speech. Like no problem with law enforcement getting involved there, though it's rich that that particular professor faced that particular set of consequences given his disposition on other things. Still shouldn't have happened. But there's other issues where chants and sit-ins are now being characterized as, or like one individual or a handful of individuals in an otherwise large crowd that is somewhat innocuous and, again, maybe even perhaps misguided. They're being kind of rounded up, and the crackdown on expression is being embraced by people who have previously allowed for all sorts of left-wing agitation. So that part is interesting. And the third thing is that this has caused a rift within the right around this whole, like, what's the role of the United States involvement broadly in foreign policy? Like, are we going to be more isolationist, or are we going to be more of a country that embraces the fact that we're a global hegemon? And we do have a bunch of satellite states. We call them allies, but more or less they're satellite states. And anytime they can kind of have a leg up technologically or socially, culturally, it's because they have the entire backing of the United States military and money supply, essentially.
Which is
And, well, and so the tension there, then, and that gets overlaid with cultural issues of Christian Zionist versus kind of more, let's say, traditionally oriented folks who even may say like something like they embrace Judeo-Christian ethics, but they have a much more emphasis on the Christian than the Judeo, let's say. And you see this inflame with the Christ is King controversy and what happened with Candace Owens and the Daily Wire and all that nonsense. And then the laundering in of people who are reactionary agitators who embody hypocrisy in their personal life, but espouse, like, they say all the right things. But they say all the right things, quote unquote, with respect to their audience. Any insights these people have, in my experience, can be found better said with clearer vision without all the excess baggage that comes with those individuals by other people. And these are people within and without right-wing media. So those are kind of the three big things I see, in addition to like the potential for like broad-scale regional or global war and the humanitarian crises that are intrinsic to this conflict. Yeah. So, Sam, which one of these threads do you want to pull on? And folks in the comments, you can definitely help guide us if you have a preference.
One thing I want to say, because I think I remember bringing it up, or at least I remember us discussing it, whatever, maybe was it 2 live streams ago. this idea that folks that are on the right that are have been mostly championing free speech for decades, and then all of a sudden this thing breaks out, Hamas Israel conflict. Now all of a sudden are maybe somewhat flipping their stance, or at least saying, "Hey, maybe there's certain things that we ought not to say," blah blah. And it's getting thrown in their face. I I I brought this up because I think there needs to be a distinction. Having free speech as an important value, I think we all should have that. But how high up the hierarchy do you place free speech? And That's one question. The more important question is which are the values that you're placing above free speech.
Mhm.
Um, if you're placing compassion above free speech, you might be on the left, just a character trait or
Mhm.
a personality trait.
Yep.
Um, I at least introspectively can put free speech below certain qualities, and I can at least be transparent about them and say, hey, look, above free speech, I would put something like God, because I'm a Christian and I believe. So I would put that there. And so when you have a conflict that's conflicting free speech and God, I'm going to side on God. And so it's going to look like I am against free speech, which is not the case. It's just slightly not as important to me as a higher quality, a bigger value, I should say. Um, and I at least want to bring that up because I think that plays out, and you can see that sort of stuff play out. Whereas, like, someone who's seemingly flipping their side, mm, that's not really the case, but they are just expressing the fact that they've got higher values, that they are.
But that's all the left's doing too. That's all like the hate speech stuff. It's like, oh well,
Yes,
and
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
we're
take
against hate speech.
I'm gonna take
Yes,
the best case. There's a bunch of cynical people. Like most of the people who lead these type of things are very much cynical and using this in a utilitarian way. But I think most of the people broadly who embody this, who are kind of detached from that leadership or that cultural momentum, are genuinely expressed. Oh well, we shouldn't say things that are mean. It's like, yeah, like I don't want people to be unnecessarily mean. Like it's
yeah,
rude, like all that kind of stuff. But I don't want the force of law or the force of some university body
yeah,
or someone who's overzealous in the HR department or a coworker who's, the red guard is, I don't want that. And
yeah,
so the left is just saying, well, no, look, like we need to protect these people. And they've been, people, they've been historically marginalized, et cetera, as, diluting away the individual. But it's like, well, so what, explain to me, and, we're having kind of a Socratic process here. Explain to me why I should say it's okay for you to have a higher value and that not be hypocrisy. But when they claim, hey, look, what about free speech? Even though they've stood against it for the past, however, decade and a half, 2 decades, back to the 60s, back to back to Hegel or something. It's like, it's the same, procedurally, it's the same process. I understand there's a qualitative difference in terms of the ends at which it's directed, but why should that qualitative difference be sufficient to win people over to your perspective?
no, well, I bring this up because um it helps. The argument should be, well, it should not be, hey, look at you, you've now swapped positions, or now, like, ooh, look, all of a sudden you're against free speech and blah blah blah, what happened to that? That's not helping, and that's not doing anything. A better approach is, you now have to convince the other side as to why the value that you placed above free speech is a good one, and one that society as a whole should adopt, versus what they have put above free speech, or whatever value order that they have. The arguments that you're going to try and come up against, what you're going to try and sway the other side, is not just ad hominem attacks or attacks of, like, being a hypocrite. It's now a, hey, I have a value that supersedes free speech, and here's my reasoning. You have a value, though, that's your value above free speech is here, but it's not compatible with society or whatever else you want to argue for. My only point is your method for the setup for the discussion, the argument, the fight, the whatever it is framed differently. And instead of it just being yeah, you're now a hypocrite. I don't have to believe anything that you say. It's now framed in such a way where it's like, okay, I'm going to make the argument that the rank order that I put free speech is here. Here's my reasoning. The rank order you've put free speech is here, and I think you're wrong. Something along those lines.
Yeah, but I mean, like, let's say that, like, superficially, everyone's like, we can all agree free speech is the second most important thing. It's like, great. So now what's at the top of your values hierarchy? By the way, I actually agree that free speech is not the ultimate thing, and I think it's actually impossible for it to be, even though some people who fancy themselves classical liberals, especially like left classical liberals, would claim that. Like, they don't actually believe that, and you can ask them on any number of social or cultural issues, and you'll see very quickly that that's actually not what they believe. But that's okay. I mean, they're saying something aspirationally. By the way, Michael Knowles, I think, does a great job of explaining in his own kind of witty, like small c, traditional conservative way, steelmaning that case. But I still think it's like a North Star at which we should aim. And I am disheartened by the extent to which I've seen folks who are on the right, first of all, bicker back and forth with each other. Second of all, who've made fun of, who've called out cancel culture, who've made fun of hate speech codes and safe spaces, now be mums the word or openly endorse some of these same things. And by the way, like, obviously criminal speech and threats and behavior is different than legally protected speech within the confines we've erected structurally where that speech can be expressed. I'm not talking about the illegal stuff. Obviously, like, we have other ways to deal with that. But this idea that, well, now because my proverbial ox is gored, now I care about erecting hate speech statutes on college campuses. It's like, what the hell kind of principle is that?
Yeah.
And I know what it is. It's essentially like, well, this is a group I care about. And
no, for sure.
And it's like,
so,
yeah, but that's all the left was saying.
So are you disheartened or upset that they're like maybe their backbone was not quite as sturdy as you'd want them to be, and they kind of just let that slide?
It's not even about the position. It's not even about the fact that they have something that seems like a tension, potentially hypocrisy. Because you're right, maybe it's not hypocrisy. Maybe it's just an unfolding of a difference in value hierarchies. I take that. What pisses me off the most, candidly, is that they can't be honest about that. And that they can't be intellectually honest enough to say, well, this is all the other folks were doing too. And so at least on that level, they're the same. The moral calculus can be different. We're not even talking about that right now. But the lack of introspection that way, because what it seems like they jumped on the back of the counterculture that was mounting against excesses of kind of a neo-Marxist worldview on the cultural front, and said, like, these are the reasons we need to uphold free speech. And then it's easy. It's
the word.
It's always easy to say that whenever it's, hey, I need to be able to speak in the public square, or even forget that. People need to be able to hear me in the public square if they want to, right? That's a lot of how censorship actually happens online. It's not that they turn you off. It's that they make it so that no one else can hear you. So you can still speak, right? Which is you have a right to speak. You don't have a right to amplification. And that tends towards, obviously, it's like the difference between saying you can't go to the public square and talk to people versus saying people can't come to the public square and listen to you. Oh, we've protected your right to free speech. But yeah, as soon as you walk into the public square, we gated off and we put guards there and no one's coming in. It seems like they latched onto this and they did it instrumentally, which, don't get me wrong, free speech is an instrument, but it's not only an instrument. It's also an ideal. It's a conditional ideal. I take all of that for sure, and we can have arguments about that. We can have debates about that. That's the part of the social and political mediation of this. But I have, yeah, it's just been disappointing. And there have been others who have been consistent on this. There have been others who were, ejected from the left, who are culturally and politically more affiliated with them, who have stood firm on this and been consistent on this front. And there have been some on the right who have done that too. The extra layer of sadness is that the people who now get to claim like, oh, look, we're actual free speech warriors. I find a lot of them to have, at best, half-baked ideas, be very reactionary by nature, meaning essentially they just engage in politics of negation with very little skin in the game for how to affirm things going forward and build going forward. And again, they aren't the
Well,
best advocates for their ideals, even the ones that are good.
yeah, I guess it's disappointing seeing your idols or your heroes that you looked up to when they were standing up against a larger Marxist threat and they were the counterculture, to see those same heroes now that they are uh, in a sea amongst their friends not stand up against the direction that their own party is moving, under those same ideals. It would have been nicer if more people had stuck to their guns
Mm-hmm.
and held those ideals.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And that's why I think it is important to be clear and know your own values and your own value hierarchy, because um, it might be a different story if back in the day you were rah-rahing about free speech and you said, hey, look, I'm all for free speech. I caveat, I actually hold this value to be higher. And then all of a sudden now no one's going to think you're a hypocrite or think you're any worse for the wear, when now you're saying like, yeah, but I'm putting free speech on the back burner because of this value that I hold dear. Um, Nobody really did that. And it
Michael
is
Knowles did
upsetting.
that. He's very explicit about it. That's why I like the guy. It's like he's got very different training than I do. Like he's very much on the cultural and literary side, and I'm all on like the stats and analytics side. But he makes a fair enough case, and actually a case I agree with. But the thing is, he's not the one who's folded. I view him as being consistent, to your point, right? There's no like jarring hypocrisy. But he hasn't even engaged in the politics of kind of negation um, and overuse of semantically defenestrated terms like anti-Semitic. He's not been doing that. It's the people who have been claiming the mantle of free speech who are doing those two things. And that is what bothers me. Dude, did you get the chance to watch the Zero Hedge debate?
I watched the first maybe third of it, maybe, I think.
Okay. Yeah, it's 2 hours. Fair enough. It's
Yeah,
mediated
it's
by
pretty good.
Sagar or moderated by Sagar and Jetty, who's of Breaking Points, who's kind of a right populist-ish guy.
Can I real quick
Yeah,
go off on a semantic
yeah,
tangent,
go for it.
because you can help me out,
Mhm.
because you've used the word hypocrite a couple times, and I just want to ask you how, if you could clarify how you're meaning it, because
Mhm.
I've always thought that um, me saying, uh, "Hey, it's not good to eat meat," but then I go home and eating meat, that is not hypocrisy. I'm just failing in my own ideals. I have a hey, it's not good to do this. It's a sin to do X, but then I go home in my private life and still do X. I've sort of just failed in my own
Yeah,
moral framework.
yeah, exactly.
If hypocrisy would be, hey, I don't fail at X. X is bad and I don't do it, but then I go home and do it. If when I say I don't commit this sin, but then go home and commit the sin, that would be sort of hypocrisy. Is
Yeah,
that correct? Or am
I
I
no, I
reading
agree.
that
Yeah,
backwards?
I think that you'll see this a lot of times with like when people come after the church, especially the Catholic Church, but the church more generally. They'll say, "Oh, look at X events that have happened," and be like, "Yep, that's terrible, no question." But like, that's not the same thing as saying that's what the church is aimed at. It's a consequence of like the moral failing of humans, and we all fall short of the
Yep.
glory and standard of God, and we can genuinely believe things are wrong, and we still are liable to sin, and that doesn't make it okay, but it's part of being human, and holding people to perfection, or this is the whole Saul Alinsky thing. It's like hold your enemy to their standards, right? Be exacting in that essentially, because you know that humans are fallible, and you will inevitably be able to exploit this interpersonally, institutionally. I'm with you. I'm not particularly interested in that definition of hypocrisy, though. If someone repeatedly says X is bad and they are repeatedly shown to do that kind of without any sort of grievance, I'd be more open to it. But the better
Right.
definition of hypocrisy, I think, is what you're kind of saying, which is, well, it's actually it's deviant of what you're saying. The way I would say, derivation of what you're saying, I would say that the way I'm thinking about hypocrisy is, did you even believe what you were saying in the first place? Because you were kind of making the steelman robust case for the utility of free expression, not only as an instrument, but as one of the guiding stars for how we move forward as a body politic and as a culture. And then the second it gets hard, you kind of seem to abandon that. And you can qualify it and hand wave all you want, but it's not clear that that qualification, those hand waving, actually dealing with the substance of the matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's certainly it when it's expedient for people to ignore it.
Right.
You, you have to imagine that that's probably going to take hold. Um, Maybe looking back, it might be comforting if some of these people just said, "Hey, look, it was expedient for me to not bring this topic up and for me not to say anything. I regret doing it. Perhaps I'll learn and I'll be better."
Mm-hmm.
We can hope for such an outcome. Um, but I think, well, just I just wanted to clarify that because I in my head I was like, okay, how's he meaning hypocrisy?
Mm-hmm.
And because you'd used it a couple times. Sorry to go off on that tangent.
No,
You
no,
can
it's
you can
good.
you can, you can go ahead.
It's good. I think it's fair enough and a good clarifying question. So yeah, that zero hedge debate I thought was decent. It's Cenk of the Young Turks, the Dave Smith, who's a prominent Mises Caucus libertarian, also host of a podcast, against Batya, who is a writer kind of in some mainstream press. She's pretty good firebrand, and Dennis Prager, moderated by Sagar and Jetty. And I thought, for the most part, it was interesting. It was cool to see all the heavyweights there, and it was cool to see kind of Zero Hedge putting it on for all the controversy around Zero Hedge. And it was 2 hours, which is way more useful than like tweet storms back and forth or passive aggressive YouTube video responses, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was, I'm curious to the extent you feel comfortable sharing it, and I understand you only watched the first third of it. How did you think about Dennis Prager? Because he was the one I was most interested. I find Dave Smith to have compelling arguments, though I don't agree with everything he says. And he's someone who I think prepares for fights, like if that makes sense. He doesn't just like walk in off the street, and say, go in cold saying, all right, I've got my talking points, let's go. But I think that a lot of people, when they talk about this issue on both sides, do that.
Mm.
And I have a lot of respect for Dennis Prager. I don't know how much he was ready for someone who was as well familiar with the history as he was and who had a genuinely different perspective than him.
Mm.
Did you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think back on what I saw. Um, I did notice that Prager's responses were very high level and often would skirt the question.
Mm.
He probably in his, to give him his own credit,
Mm-hmm.
he in his brain he probably answered the question maybe obviously to himself. But at least sometimes it wouldn't be clear because he would just sort of surface level make a point, not surface level, elevated level make a point,
Mm-hmm.
that if you weren't following Dennis Prager logic, you'd be like, how does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's probably not good in a debate. I mean, especially when you're going up against someone who, like you said, has prepped and maybe has got a ton of facts at his disposal.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I'm still here, by the way. I'm just camera off for a second.
yeah, no worries. But I did. I mean, I've listened to Prager a lot. He's one of the people that I I would say that I get a lot of my wisdom from, or at least when I did the bulk of my listening to him, because there was some years where I would listen to him a lot. Um, and so I understand his, at least I think I do, understand his logic and his train of thoughts. Um, I tend to agree with a lot of stuff that he has to say, and at least his moral standpoint and the things that the cases that he's making. Um, but I, if I'm being honest, his debate performance probably wasn't the best. It could have been better. Um, while I might agree, well, yeah, I could say while I might agree with his his rationale and his moral stance on some, maybe not all, but some of the issues, I could still be dissatisfied with his debate performance, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my take on Dennis Prager's. Chanks is he's I remember as kind of funny. I think he's bombastic and very loud and expressive, and I've listened to a number of his debates, and unfortunately, I'm so opposed slash I disagree with some of his fundamental outlooks on the world that a lot of what almost none of what he says sort of lands with me. And there was a point, it was just funny, there was this point where I had maybe like I was playing the debate and I had gone off and done something, because I when I was last I heard, they were, talking like this, being like respectful or whatever. I left, came back like 10 seconds later. Shank is just like, how dare you? You are genocide. Blah! Like, you know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
was like, how did it ramp to that? I don't know, but he's hard to listen to. Uh he's hard to listen to because, like I said, there's just so much that I disagree with him on his fundamental outlook. So that's tough. Dave Smith, I don't know a ton about him, and the other lady there, I don't know a ton about either of those. So I thought they handled themselves. Actually, the lady there, I forgot what name.
Botcha. It's her
Bacha.
first name. Yeah, I don't know how to say her last name. Yeah.
I thought she did pretty well actually. I thought she did really well. She was able to articulate her points pretty good.
Yeah.
So I thought it was just all in all, it was a good debate. I didn't get to see the ending, so I didn't see like the arc of how the conversation flowed.
Mm-hmm.
I got to, yeah, maybe a third, maybe a half of it, before I was just like, okay, I can't just. I'm no longer interested in this discussion. Actually, who I kind of was thinking would be good to put on the panel as well is Douglas Murray, because I think he's a big advocate proponent of Israel in this conflict. So he probably, and he's like, I don't know if he lives there now. I don't know what he's doing, but he's in Israel a lot.
Yeah,
So
he's
I don't
covering a
know.
lot of the kind of war fronts popping up around the
Yeah,
world.
yeah. So he's probably got a really good perspective, having been there many times recently. So
Yeah, I
that
think
would have been good.
I would like to have seen Douglas. So I agree with you about Cenk. He's an abrasive guy. I don't like that style of talk. I will say to his credit and to Anna Kasparian's credit, they've been going on many more entering into many more forums where they actually take on like their critics, Shapiro, Prager, etc. They've been willing to cover stories that the left, especially the progressive left, would rather ignore here over the last year or so. And it's like that's a real testament to their credit, I think. Like in terms of, I'm not endorsing the Young Turks or anything like that necessarily. Make up your own mind, follow your own news diet, but I think that is commendable. Having said that, I also don't like the histrionics. I don't find that to add anything to the substance of the debate, though I'm sure it's works for some people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would like to, if we were going to expand out the panel, I know people probably want like Norm Finkelstein on there, on the anti-Israeli aggression side. I've seen him speak a few times. Once against Will Chamberlain, who would also be good to put on the pro-Israel side. I don't know. Cernovich would probably be good to have. He could probably speak to both sides. Again, I know these people are controversial, but it's like these are conversations real people have. It's not just for the anointed to tell us what we can and can't believe and what we can and can't say and what we can and can't talk about them.
Right.
But I do someone else I think who would be useful on the broader perspective and the U.S. how the U.S. role interfaces with these things would be John Mearsheimer.
Hmm.
He'd be probably on the Dave Smith side of things. But yeah, it's worth checking out. The right wing drama associated with some of this, like Candace Owens getting, and this is like tangentially related. So right, this is like second, third degree removed from the conflict itself, and even the controversy about speech codes and that kind of stuff. Like the Daily Wire letting Candace Owens go or not picking her contract back up. It's not really clear which one happened. You know, that's a bunch of like I said, just internet drama, but it will be used to like grease the wheels of grifting, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term. Not claiming any of them are doing that, but people can make up their own mind. As well as some of people in like reactionary politics. It's like I don't think it's constructive for political ends, and I also don't think it helps keep people's eyes in search of like the good, the true, and the beautiful, like especially the
Yeah.
good and the true.
Right. Exactly. The Candace thing, I know you're a huge Candace fan. But what I should say is, she's having listened to her um enough. I don't listen to a ton of her podcasts because I think there for a while there she had a show where it just felt very like Oprah-y, very like
Right? Yeah,
gossipy.
yeah, yeah,
And so I'm like, I just it just wasn't for me. Like maybe she was trying to tailor her show for a specific audience, and it just I don't think it was me. Um, but you could tell when I would listen to her, I could tell that she would have very strong, pointed words to say that were like unnecessarily sharp. It's
mm-hmm.
like, okay, I mean, you can get your point across and still remain somewhat on a neutral ground, and maybe fight the idea rather than the person. But she would attack a lot of the people, and or at least her words were phrased in such a way, maybe a passive aggressive or whatever it may be, so that it was very like, yeah, you're taking shots across the bow, and you didn't have to do that, and
Yeah, and then it's the Mott
it's
and
very
Bailey. Then it's
yeah
the oh, I'm just asking questions. By the way, ask questions. I'm not like of the Shapiro stripe where like I'm gonna lambast people who do the just asking questions thing, but like then it's this retreat to like, oh, I did something passive aggressive and I got called out on it, and it's like, how dare you call me out? And it's like, you
yeah
know what you were doing,
yeah.
and
Yeah, so she would do that, and you know who else would do that?
hmm,
I'm not picking favorites. Is Crowder.
hmm,
I stopped listening to Crowder for largely the same reasons. How should I say this? I don't. While I might agree with some of their social and political takes, some, not all,
hmm,
um, it was a personal quality that they would exhibit that turned me off. That was just like um, for whatever reason, I'm not going to devote my time and energy to listen to this. It was a personal quality. So yeah, I think Crowder had the same thing. And so this Candace thing, I to your point, I completely agree. It's going to be used as cannon fodder to attack the right in general and some of the things that some of the ideals that the right is trying to uphold. Um, and I just think it's counterproductive, not a good thing. I think it should just be pretty hush as far as like the breakup goes. And even if they did have, but see, again, it's like, uh, I don't know who started it. Maybe you do. I don't know which of the ones. I think the whole reason was because, well, not the reason for their departure,
hmm.
but uh, one of the reasons for the drama is because Shapiro had a very pro-Israel stance, and then Candace maybe called him out on a couple of things, and they had like some back and forths on that. Is that how it went?
It's more. I mean, it's kind of like that. Like apparently, it was like an unwritten rule that you can't kind of have a critical stance of Israel beyond a certain thing, beyond like a no foreign aid to anyone kind of approach. that's and by the way, I'm not making this assessment. This is my reading into what Ben and Jeremy have kind of said, and credit to Jeremy for going on and taking the slings and arrows and some live streams on X in the aftermath of this. Regardless what you think he said, at least he was the man in the arena. But yeah, it's like Candace started asking questions about. First of all, Ben and Candace never had a good. They never really synced up in how they approached things. Like this was something they were critical of one another for years before they ever partnered together. They're both effective in their own right. I mean, we've got dozens of listeners right now. Like I'm not like throwing stones, David at Goliath. It's like they're effective. Like value.
Why won't they have us on? They're scared of us.
Yeah. Debate me, bro. Right? Yeah. The value neutral. They're effective.
Yeah.
The question is for me, like, how did it start? It seems to one of the precursors was probably this underlying difference in approach, and like you said, this kind of difference in style that Candace has. Again, it's effective, whatever. And then that gets grafted onto this populist right versus neoconservative right versus traditionalist conservative versus paleo. And so you have these dynamics playing out. And then eventually on an issue like Israel, where apparently there's a very clear delineation, again, an unwritten rule, something like that, within the Daily Wire, Candace starts going beyond, those bounds, it seems, and flirts with it. She didn't condemn Kanye and as forcefully as she should have, or something like that, or as much as people would have liked. A video of Ben gets leaked. He's asked at a private event. I think it's a private event. I should be clear. It could have been public, but I think it was a private event. And the video's like on a smartphone from out in the corner. They say, hey, what do you think about Candace and what she's been doing? He said, I think it was abhorrent. She should have condemned what Kanye was saying more forcefully and sooner. And I think her recent, essentially, podcast episodes or whatever, Candace episodes, were, morally questionable, at least, or something like that. And he's condemning it, right? Essentially saying, like, I don't agree with this. And then she comes on and she says something like on Twitter, like, essentially wields the words from the Bible to her political ends, saying you can't worship like two idols, which is a trope about Jewish people. Hey, like you have a dual loyalty between the United States and Israel, between Israel and Judeo-Christian values, whatever, right? And she doesn't tag Ben, but this is subtweeting. It's passive aggressive. And Ben says something like, hey, if you feel morally conflicted about taking money from us, feel free to quit, which was probably not advised legally. I think that there's some like employment law that may have like raised some red flags because he kind of backed off a little bit. But she comes back and she's like, how dare you try and insert yourself into my Bible scripture quote, tweet or whatever. And it's like, this is what I mean. You knew exactly what you were doing. For you to feign, it's just this nonsense back and forth. And I think that people like Ben and Dennis do a good job of beating back very morally bankrupt arguments on this issue and picking the people they debate well. I don't think Candace is someone. My impression is she's new to the issue. She seems curious, which I guess is to her credit. But I don't know how much of what she's in for is the reactionary side of things versus the pursuit side of things. I don't know. I'm not saying one way or the other. But there are people who are more well-versed who take a different perspective than Ben and Dennis. And those are the people that I think, if you really wanted to make the case, and this is really something where you're saying this value should be higher in our value hierarchy than kind of an unbridled free expression, and if we're going to even allow for hate speech laws on college campuses or hate speech guidance on college campuses, then you need to engage with like the best of the critics, not the people who are wrapped up in some sort of postmodern or neo-Marxist, oppressor versus oppressed paradigm, but someone who can speak to things materially and from a realist perspective. And I mean that like capital R realist perspective. And, I shouldn't say it. Dennis did it the other night. So kudos to him.
Yeah. What was your take on that debate? I mean, for each of the panelists, you mentioned Chank, but what's your take on the rest?
I think, well, first I would say a couple like big picture takeaways. I thought Sauger did a Very good job moderating, which is really hard to do when you get a bunch of um, relatively high profile internet personalities together, like people who are used to just monologuing and having hundreds of thousands or millions of people listen to them as a general rule. Um,
I'm very familiar with this. Yes.
right, right. We struggle with it every day. The So I thought he did a good job moderating. It did get hot at times, but they were able to progress through different questions, which is, I think, the hallmark of actually having a conversation and even something that borders on the debate. I think they talked past each other a little bit on the difference between October 7th and the response and what that does and maybe should have looked like versus this situated within the broader historical context. I thought that they weren't in sync about when we should talk about the specifics versus the general. I thought in the individual panelist, I'm not a big fan of Chank's histrionics, but that's like a taste type thing. I think it's also pretty objective that it's not perhaps the best way to go about convincing people. But that's Chank. He wasn't being disingenuous. It's just him, or he wasn't being maybe more disingenuous than he has a propensity to be, let's say. I don't know. But even he raised some good points. And he was also a very good sport because they was sponsored by Public Square, which is kind of like a new right, e-commerce type thing. And Dave Smith was the guy sitting next to Chank doing the ad reads for Public Square. And so Chank just had to sit there and take like these 90-minute ad reads, kind of like,
Are you tired of the left?
yeah, exactly. Dogging on the left. And he was a good sport about it. And the second ad read, which by the way, if nothing else, you should watch it to at least get to the second ad read. Dave Smith goes, and this message is fully endorsed by my friend Shank. And it was so I thought that specific example is actually something I think that I want to talk to more broadly, which is in addition to being well moderated and the unfortunate disconnect or asynchronous between the specific and the general, I actually thought the panelists did a fairly good job of avoiding ad hominem and being intense in the debate, but not taking everything personally. And I'm not saying this as a knock against Prager, but I imagine that's particularly hard for someone who shares that cultural lineage and who is so invested in this issue. We all are invested in this issue, but it's not, doesn't seem crazy to say that, or posit that some people are more invested than others, due to lineage.
If you've got family
systems.
there.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was good. I do think Dennis could have done better. But he did stay. One of the things that I love that he says, and I know you love this too, he talks about, I'd rather have clarity than agreement. And I think that was good. I think that was something that you should aim at in this type of conversation. And I think there was clarity raised. Batya, I think, was effective in making some of her points. And she was also effective because you gain credibility when you can acknowledge the strength in the other person's arguments, at least as you see them, right? It's like something like whether it's valid or not, I think psychologically we were wired to say something like, oh, if you can do that, then I think you're being more honest, like you're playing the game in a more honest way. And then Dave Smith is someone who I think is, I don't know why I kept calling Dennis Prager Mr. Prager. Maybe he was just like, it's a generational thing, or he felt like it was something he should do, because he's very much a kind of cavalier when he speaks generally. I thought he did a good job of being polished. I think a lot of his arguments are very strong in the more general situating of the context between Israel and Palestine and Palestinians, and some of the critiques of the Likud party and the hate speech apparatus and all that kind of stuff. I would love to see Dennis and Dave do like a series of like 1 hour conversations on specific incidents throughout the whenever they want to start the history of this conflict, wherever they can agree to start the history of it and talk about things to see how that would unfold, because they both seem pretty well read in on the history.
Yeah. Just real quick, I just want to like say that I maybe I'm wrong. I'm fully willing to admit that I'm wrong here, but I'm not very interested in the intermittent historical scuffles between the two warring parties. The reason for that is because I'm not so sure, if I had you know the the facts 100% as they were historically
Mhm.
and everything laid out perfectly, then maybe I could do a tally and be like, oh, one side's got more.
Right, right.
I don't think that's number one possible. Number two, an endeavor to do so is kind of just like, I don't know what you're doing. I think you're wasting a lot of your time to just be like trying to do a tit for tat analysis of the history.
It's hard, yes.
So my approach to that is like, uh, it doesn't really, it's not really pertinent who's started it
Mhm.
because they're just going to point the finger. You know what I mean? So you have to look at other things. So I'm not. So they did this a couple times, several times in the and actually it's one of the things that kind of like frustrated me with like some of Dennis's points. Is he's just like, well, in 1948 this happened, and it's like you keep going back to like historical events, and I'm like, okay, uh, well, to his credit, he also to mitigate that, he does the high level like, look, let's not be down in the trenches here. Let's just talk about this high level conflict and what both sides represent and what that means and just extrapolate out. Uh, I find more value in that than I do into the tit for tat analysis of the history. Um,
Yeah.
that's
The
why I would that's why I would say that I like and I would be inclined to agree with Prager's approach to a lot of these issues because I find that when you don't have all the facts and maybe getting at all the facts is somewhat impossible, then you ought to have a moral framework with which to view high level ideals and be like, okay, I'm on this side for this particular reason. And does that mean I endorse everything that they just did? No. I can, you know, I can fully admit that both sides have done atrocious things. But I, if I'm planting my flag anywhere, I do it here for these reasons, and I can be clear on that.
Yeah, I think
Um,
clarity is good. Again, back to that point. And I
yeah,
do think I actually agree with you. I'm not sure you can do the historical being. I don't know if that's actually possible, right?
no,
Like,
and it kind of maybe is one of the reasons why I sort of tuned out because I was like, okay, too much of that, and I'm like, who's caring? Now I completely understand that if you or a close member of your family has been just involved in an historical attack, yeah, you're putting a ton of weight on a historical event. Um, so I can understand why you feel such passion to bring about certain historical events, but to an alien that's just looking at this conflict and who doesn't have all the facts, they're like, guys, I don't know what you're doing. It's not convincing anybody. It's too, he started it. Okay, it's like, okay, nobody knows. What are y'all doing?
yeah, but so the only thing I would say, I mean, we have a difference. We actually talked about this a little bit in our crossover episode, like the difference between you having a good heuristics approach. Here are the guiding principles, and that's how I'm going to kind of feel things out in the absence of being able to do the full
Yep.
forensic accounting. And I
Yep.
have kind of a more like, hey, I want to do like a bottom up and see what kind of emerges. But I actually think that it's way more efficient and not always, but it can be more effective to do it your way. Having said that, this issue in particular, and there's others as well, but this one, just since we're talking about it, I worry that some of the people for whom I have affinity leave out things not because they don't think they're important, but because they undermine the ideal of the heuristic that they espouse. And it's like, well, if that's the case, then that's no longer a good heuristic because I don't believe you, or we have historical evidence that says that that's actually not how things would play out. Um, and the more you get into the particulars on this issue, I think the more criticism of individual actions on both sides you can get at, as opposed to just saying, well, I have kind of like a general rubric, and I'm going to have a lot of type 1 and type 2 errors as I group people into one category versus another. I personally get uncomfortable with that. But I understand that people don't have 2 hours is like a long time to sit down and watch anything. Um, my poor daughter, I'm like sitting here like rocking her to sleep. She's like got this like blaring in the background. Um, she'll be well cultured if nothing else. But yeah, like in 2 hours is not
in
nearly
Middle East affairs and Bitcoin.
right. Yeah, in Middle East affairs and Bitcoin. That's right. I was talking to my advisor when we brought her home, like maybe 3 weeks after we brought her home. I was just getting back into doing some of the research and writing and stuff, and she was crying beforehand and kind of like fussing, not like wailing like she does now, but crying. And I get to talking with my advisor, and like 5 minutes in talking with my advisor, I'm holding my daughter, and I was like, "Hey, just so you know, we just put my daughter to sleep," and talking about like game theoretic modeling of information warranties, and he busted out laughing. Essentially, like she's got good taste. Yeah, it's something like 24 people in the world care about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully more though. But no, dude. So that's all I'm saying. Is like I don't think that the heuristic thing is sufficient, but I do think it's a necessary complexity reduction and time saving mechanism. But I think that when you have something that is this potentially existential and this morally complex, teasing things apart, at least to a point where you're comfortable, is good. And maybe the better way to do that is to combine the approaches and say something like, who are the best 3 or 4 voices on both sides of the issue? And like for this issue and these issues, because it'll happen, there'll be more conflict to come, as we saw last weekend with the barrage from Iran and today with the barrage from Israel. Maybe it's just to say like, hey, like I like Douglas Murray, I like Dennis Prager, I like Will Chamberlain on one side, and I like Dave Smith, I like John Mearsheimer, and I like Daryl Cooper on the other, or something like that. And to say and that way I can blot out all of the people who do this whole like anti-colonialism, oppressor versus oppressed thing, or that's their prescription for everything. And I can also avoid like from the people who seek to weaponize something that is a very serious thing, anti-Semitism, to silence their opponents. Like that's kind of how I would view it. Maybe that's like the blend of their approaches. I don't have to know everything, but can I find the people who I think make the best arguments on both sides, and then just kind of listen to those arguments. I don't have to actually go in and read 50 books on the issue or listen to 100 hours of podcasts or something like that.
Well, yeah, and to steal Prager's words, it's he prefers clarity to agreement, and a point of clarification where you can really, if someone's just saying, here's your heuristic, here's your approach on how you approach this conflict. I'm perfectly fine on a high level kind of overview of the issues with a certain moral framework. I'm going to be honest about that moral framework and say, look, it's going to land me here. I'm just letting you know. And that's not saying that I endorse everything that happens, but it's going to land me on this side, on this camp. But also, I will clarify that while you may be 100% right in all of your findings of going from the bottom up and doing that, a bunch of that stuff, I'm a lot of that doesn't interest me anymore, as I mentioned before. You know what I mean? It's like, there's that.
We have to map this onto Bitcoin to get you to care about the particulars.
Pretty much, which I was going to, because I don't know if you saw, there was a meme where it showed, the rockets being fired from Gaza, and then the Iron Dome missiles fired up on their side, and it was under the Gazan rockets. It was like, my tax dollars somehow, also my tax dollars, whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of Bitcoiners would like that meme, and actually though, so I don't know if I've become more libertarian in that sense, because a lot of Bitcoiners are, and I know Dave Smith is a libertarian, even though I disagreed with a lot of the stuff that he had to say. I think.
Can you tell me like one example, just so I can, and you can finish your point first if you prefer, but
Honestly, I can't remember. I just remember thinking, I don't think that, like, he would say something and I would just think to myself, I don't believe that point to be very strong. Like, I feel like it was a very weak argument, and so it wasn't really that good to me. I honestly could not tell you.
okay.
So I could not remember, but I just remember having that thought, just be like, yeah, that was kind of a weak argument. I don't really believe that. So apologies there. I can't give you specifics. But it's an interesting thing, because while Dave Smith is a libertarian, and I have a lot of affinity and respect for libertarians, more so now, having become a Bitcoiner, I think I still, because I still hold this high level ideals, there are still values a lot higher than just saying "f you" to the state, and so therefore I can't call myself a libertarian in good faith. And I think that's what led me so much to disagreeing with him, is because I still hold maybe high level values of, say, God, or the Israeli people in general. Um, just to say, like, yeah, I mean, I tend to disagree with a lot of the stuff that he had to say.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
So I mean, like, look, I'm not a libertarian. I am classically liberal. I'm what Michael Knowles would call a squish. I'm someone who has conservative dispositions but believes that I don't know everything, and so I need to leave space for people who may be able to round me out and get rid of my idiosyncratic misgivings. Um, but like I think a lot of the Israeli people, from Pharaoh to the pogroms uh, to Nazi Germany, like they have been through a lot, no question. But I don't
yeah,
find any sort of first of all,
they've been in a few pickles.
yeah. So I can
Yeah,
understand when people have like when people who have that cultural ancestry say something like we're on guard all the time. Fair enough, no question. Um, I don't think that means we get to like have two standards for like how we adjudicate speech in a country. Like, okay, well, you have like historical misgivings that are well founded. It's like, yeah, but like a lot, if you go sufficiently far back, everyone does. And it's like, who's deciding and why? I'd rather have a single standard. And that's, again,
but
like
that single standard, you're going to have to clarify what's above that, and everyone's got to know what's above it, because you know what I
my
mean.
standard is the government shouldn't get involved in mediating legally permissible speech. That's one standard. And if
How do you
in
feel? How do you feel about Elon Musk saying "f you" to the Brazilian judge about free speech and allowing it?
allowing oh allowing the people in Brazil that he wanted to get kicked off, yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah.
I think that's I can't remember the full details of the story, but it was something like there's a Supreme Court in Brazil that wanted to censor, or like they made it, somehow they put it into law that certain people were not allowed on X, and then Musk said screw it. He
Yeah,
kind of superseded the law.
there's one judge on the high court who's taken it upon himself to uh, be very heavy-handed with the government and seek to silence a lot of dissent. By the way, I'm pulling up right now our newswire, freedomcast.substack.com. It's also available through our locals page. You can also find it on our website, freedomcast.us. The story you're talking about right here is from the Epoch Times by way of Zero Hedge, ironically. Elon Musk says he will defy order from Brazil's Supreme Court after Twitter files. And Michael Schellenberger, who was involved heavily in the Twitter files, was reporting on this. Glenn Greenwald, who is someone of the left, has been all over this story for at least a year now. This kind of persecution from this judge. Yeah, because it goes well beyond this particular issue. But yeah, he's essentially said, like, we don't think that this is justly adjudicated through your system in Brazil, so we're not going to follow suit. But Elon Musk has taken people down in other countries, like where
Yeah.
for the same action in our country he would not.
But how do you view his action? Because in the beginning, he was very, very, very clear, and it was just like, if it's not illegal,
Mm-hmm.
it would be allowed.
I think that's his again. I think that's his guiding star. Like this is where this gets back to our hypocrisy conversation.
But no, he's got a higher prerogative.
I think no, it's a North Star. It's something at which you should aspire, but you're going to fall short of. I think he's saying something he genuinely believes, but he knows that in the particulars, there's going to have to be harder decisions made. He has done stuff like reverse bans or suspensions that he put on mainstream media reporters. He's allowed Alex Jones back on. Those two will hate that I just grouped them together in examples. But like that's both sides of the coin towards the free speech direction. There have been other things where he hasn't. And it's like, and I think the people who are most critical of Musk don't want him to succeed and are you looking for ways to say like, look, he's not a free speech absolutist like he claims. It's like, no, I believe he actually personally is. I think he's saying something like, I'm in charge of Twitter and I'm going to do the best I can. And my benchmark is the realist counterfactual. It's not what would an actual free speech platform look like? It's what did it look like before him, and how much were we being having our legs pissed on and being told it was raining by the last leadership cohort, and have we moved the ball in a good direction? Good in terms of free speech, but also good in terms of other objective criteria, I would say, beyond free speech.
Apt. Apt analysis.
Thanks, man. All right. Well, let me see if we've got any questions. And if not, I guess we can wrap up unless you got anything else you want, Sam.
Um, buy Bitcoin. Store, be have self custody of your Bitcoin. Don't leave it on exchanges where it can be stolen. Um, and yeah, do your own research. It's it's the future.
Even though I'm not as big of a bull on Bitcoin as Sam, I hope he's right. And I suspect that the odds are better than its
100%.
critics. All right. I would say let's go ahead and run through the plugs one more time.
Sure.
FreedomCast.substack.com. It's our free news wire. We only send out one email a week. We don't write the news articles. We source them from people from a lot of different backgrounds. We're not aiming at the stuff that you always see in the headlines, though you will see some of that. We're aiming at the stuff that's going to be the types of stories you should follow to understand the culture wars, the battles at the limit of civics, and both domestically and internationally. Then new merch dropping soon. You can find our merch store through either our locals page, freedomcast.locals.com, or our website, freedomcast.us. Free merch for the first 3 people who can send in a completed bingo card to bingo@freedomcast.us. Throw that on the screen one more time. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, we're launching a poker night with the FreedomCast founders, and that will be available to FreedomCast local supporters in the community. FreedomCast.locals.com. Use discount 4 to get over 50% off a basic membership for 6 months and over 25% off of a top tier membership for 6 months. Try it out. If you don't like it, no need to continue. If you have other features you'd like for us to bring on, feel free to reach out to us. Anything else, bud?
Nope, I think that does it.
All right. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Let's see.